Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Indoor Recess. A new segment here we're doing at the Star, just chatting with our reporters and whatnot about the return of sports in this COVID-19 era. So how you guys doing?
Doing pretty good, Justin. How are you doing?
Not bad, just stuck in my condo for most of the time, but it's been all right. How about you, Dave?
Yeah, hanging in just fine. Excited to see sports coming back. I mean, baseball's botching it. The NBA looked great last night, and we'll see how the NHL does.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a pretty big weekend for, I guess, like all sports reporters. I mean, it's a long weekend for most of us, but for you guys, it's probably like the busiest weekend all summer. So, Kevin, you had a bit of a chance to get a peek at the bubble here in Toronto. How was that? How did that go?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I live close to the rink in the Royal York, so I was able to sort of walk around and see what the players had at their fingertips. I mean, there's a plaza. They've given them a bit of Front Street. They have a tunnel between, well, not the tunnel, but they come down York Street, sort of isolated, coming out of the basement of the Royal York, coming down isolated through, I guess, the path where the GO train is on York Street, and then they go into this door that I've noticed before, but if you go to the other side of the building, there's no entrance for that door. So I believe that goes into utility, like a utility room that tunnels underneath and pops out at the Air Canada Centre or the Scotiabank Arena. So they are fairly well isolated. I mean, I guess they share the same air as the rest of humanity when they walk through part of the path, but that seems to be the only real sort of outside world connecting to the team, to the players. So I think they've done a nice job in terms of being able to keep the players in their hotel hubs and getting them to the rink. And then, of course, inside the rink, there's no fans, so that's kind of weird. The media sits in a different location. And the Zamboni drivers and people that shovel the ice and sort of keep it, they have their own section off to one corner. I don't believe there's any sort of contact between them and the players. And then you have the on-ice officials that they're sitting in another area, and while they're probably in the same hotel, they're not really contacting the players either. So it's the only officials that have anything to do with the players are the on-ice officials. So I think the NHL has done a pretty good job of locking down. And when you start with no COVID cases, at least according to the tests, I think you've gotten yourself off to a good start.
How weird was it without the fans in attendance?
Well, I tell the story that I actually missed an Alex Kerfoot goal. The Leafs didn't celebrate afterwards. The scoreboard was late putting up the goal. There was no replay. And all of a sudden, everybody was at center ice, and I just kind of looked around like, what happened? And, of course, I'm not sitting beside any other media person to ask. So I just sort of kind of waited to see what happened. I was distracted with something else, and the Leafs scored, and they went up 2-0. And it took a while for the scoreboard to catch up to the score, and I go, oh, okay. And then somebody on Twitter told me. So, oh, that's what happened. All right. And then you see the replays on Twitter. So the fans do make a difference in terms of, heightened awareness. They make a difference in terms of atmosphere. But I don't know that they necessarily will make a big difference for the players in terms of intensity, certainly when the games start to matter.
Cool. So obviously the Leafs are taking on the Blue Jackets, not Boston, which is, I think, to a lot of, I mean, it could be Boston, but I mean, to a lot of Leafs fans liking, they're not playing Boston first. So Dave, how do you think the Leafs are going to stack up to the Blue Jackets?
Look, I think this is a dream scenario for the Maple Leafs because let's face it, when we were, before the season was rudely interrupted by the coronavirus, they were staring down one of the worst inevitabilities, probably the worst inevitability in Toronto sports since the Raptors knew they were going to have to face LeBron every spring.
Yeah.
Playoffs in the DeMar DeRozan, Kyle Lowry era. And that was this double whammy of being in the Atlantic Division and knowing you were going to have to face the Bruins or the Tampa Bay Lightning. If you happen to win around, you're going to have to face them both to get beyond the Atlantic Division. And that seemed like a death sentence for the Maple Leafs in a lot of ways. And I think this season, probably they were heading in that direction of losing the first round to one of those teams. And so now you're faced with the possibility of, hey, you don't have to play either of those teams in the first play-in round, and you play a team that I think you match up well with. I understand that Tortorella, Blue Jackets, are coming off last spring when they beat the Tampa Bay Lightning in dramatic fashion, sweeping one of the best teams in recent memory in the regular season in 4 games. But that's a different scenario because they had the ramp up to the playoffs. They had the benefit of a regular season. The Blue Jackets did. This time you're coming out of the box after 4 months off with a very, minimal training camp and 1 exhibition game. I think the team that's got more skill, more speed, more ability to improvise is the team that's going to have the advantage here. And that's clearly the Maple Leafs. I think the systems team, like the Blue Jackets, is going to be at a disadvantage because they've had so little time to prepare in game situations. And at least that's my theory. We shall see if it holds true.
I'll back up that theory. And what I kind of like for the Leafs in this particular scenario is that it's not destiny that they're now going to face Tampa or Boston in the second round.
Yeah.
I would argue they'd match up well against Tampa. Tampa, I like their experience more, but they probably would have a better fighting chance against Tampa than they would against Boston. But the way you just don't know who's going to survive or what the seeds are going to be. And I kind of like the way they match up against every other team that is a possibility for them. So I kind of like if they get by Columbus, and I agree with Dave that the Leafs match up better against Columbus than just about any other team that they could have drawn. I think the second round match, which will be the first round of the playoffs, oddly enough, could work in the Leafs' favor too.
So we should probably not take too much weight into that exhibition game against, Columbus and Boston, where Columbus just essentially just rolled over Boston.
Well, what's interesting about that is like Boston's one of the teams that gets and Tampa and Washington and Philadelphia. They didn't have to worry about the first. They weren't ramping up for Saturday. They can kind of use their round robin to ramp themselves up. Mm-hmm. So, Columbus had to prove something and Boston didn't. So that's how I read that.
Cool. So the Leafs played Montreal on Tuesday, went fairly well. They won the game. Saw a lot of action from Nick Robertson, who is a big topic, obviously, in this pandemic, return to play. What are you guys thinking about, or your thoughts on the Leafs bottom lines and whether or not Nick Robertson were going to be included in that mix early on in the return to play?
Yeah, I'd be surprised if he's not included. I think the whole theory here by throwing him out there is that, look, Columbus is a great suppression team. They're really good at keeping the game boring and biding their time and being very patient with that 1-2-2 forecheck they play. That can be, I would say is a crime against the game, but works, right? It is a really good way to play hockey if you're under-talented, under-skilled, and you've got a really domineering coach like John Tortorella who likes to take control of things. But, you can do that. You can try and shut down, the top line, and you can shut down the second line. But, for teams that are trying to shut down depth lines with offense, I think the Leafs to have a third line with that much speed, and Robertson only adds to that and that much skill. And Robertson adds to that in a way that Pierre Engvall doesn't, because Robertson clearly has more offensive upside than Engvall. I think it makes sense to throw him out there. Now, 18-year-olds in the playoffs. 18-year-olds, by the way, and I don't know what you've heard about this, Kevin, but 18-year-olds who have a weak spot in terms of judgment, in terms of their ability to maybe be a little more patient and not take too many crazy risks. I mean, the OHL is famous for producing guys who are risk takers and who get humbled when they come to the NHL. So we'll see how he deals with all those aspects of the game. But in terms of being able to be an athlete and fly out there and hang with anybody in this league in terms of skating ability, Nick Robertson does that. And I think that's what he's going to be asked to do here. It's going to be very simple for him. Go out there and put pressure on the Blue Jackets with your speed and skill, because we've got plenty of other guys through this lineup who can also do that, and you just got to be one of them. You don't have to do anything special.
And the other thing, I believe Gauthier would probably be the guy sitting out. Engvall would be the fourth line center, and in a defensive situation, at least protecting a 1-goal or 2-goal lead, you'll probably see Robertson sat and Engvall go back into that spot on the left wing on the third line as they protect the lead. But what I kind of worry about, this market really has a historic habit of putting way too much on a young player way too early and eating their young. He's an 18-year-old hockey player. He's got a great backstory. He's got a great attitude. He's got great talent. Let's not worry if he makes a mistake out there. Let's not worry if he doesn't score a goal. But this market will eat its own pretty quickly if he's not – like, he doesn't need to be the saver. There's like 11 guys that can carry the load on forward. Let him play. It wouldn't surprise me if they didn't play him the first game and they brought him in for the second game if Keefe showed some loyalty to the 12 guys, the 12 forwards that got him to the playoffs, and then brought in Robertson as an added bonus. But this market, young players, they eat them alive sometimes.
So the one thing with that, Kevin, I think you're right. Like you said the word there, savior. And I think in the past, when you look at some guys that have rolled into town and played as 18-year-olds, Luke Shen comes to mind. Those guys were expected to over-deliver, right, at young ages. And they were expected to contribute immediately and expected to be backbones and bedrock players of this franchise at ages that were ridiculously young. That's not what they're asking here, right? They've got their bedrock guys. They've got their Matthews and Tavares and Marner and Nylander. They've got 50% of the salary cap tied up in 4 guys who can very much or better be able to handle the load, or this whole operation isn't going in the direction they need it to go. And all he's got to be is essentially a bit player, a contributor. He doesn't have to carry things. And by the way, whatever he contributes, it's like gravy, right? Like, because Pierre Engvall, yeah, you're right. Whether it's Pierre Engvall or Freddie Gauthier, whoever gets shuffled out of this thing in favor of Robertson, their upside is so minimal on the offensive side of the puck. At a moment where, to my earlier theory, at a moment where I think you're going to be able to outscore some of your defensive deficiencies, because I think the goalies will be behind the shooters in this situation. I think the defense will be behind the offense in a situation like this. I think it's going to be much like October hockey. All those things, you kind of tick off that list, and it all adds up to it makes sense to throw an 18-year-old in here, considering the enormity of his athletic ability, skill, and speed.
I trust that Kyle Dubas and Sheldon Keefe know what they're doing with this kid. I'm not sure the rest of the market gets it. I was pretty much on every Zoom call with Sheldon Keefe, and every day somebody asked him about Nick Robertson. There's a hype around this kid that I don't think quite warrants the 12th best forward on the team. And I think there's an over expectation among the fan base. And that's where I worry about what's best for him in the long term.
Like making your NHL debut in any part of the year is very difficult, but then doing it in the middle of August in a strange environment, right into the playoffs is very hard.
And watch him win the Conn Smythe.
Look, I mean, my thing on that is, maybe that's another reason why this is a good moment to do it. Like in a regular playoff scenario where you're jumping the proverbial moving train as an 18-year-old coming out of the OHL, that's a different thing, right? That's asking your 18-year-old prospect to fail, essentially, and fail very publicly in the biggest market, the most hyped market, hype-prone market, as Kevin would say, in this league. And I agree with him on that. But this isn't that, right? Like, we don't know what to expect here. Everybody's discombobulated. Everybody's coming out of this in a way we can't predict with any sort of historic precedent, because there is no historic precedent to this, really. And so I think, again, whether or not he plays well, whether or not he actually delivers, that's going to be tough to say. We know one thing about Sheldon Keefe. He's not afraid to change lineups. He's not afraid to go away from the kid. And I don't think he's got particular loyalty to any of these 12 guys that have been in the lineup previously, because he's shown again and again, in the very short time he's been the coach of this team, that he's not afraid to make changes for the sake of change, and just because he thinks change is warranted. I wouldn't be surprised if he's the kind of coach that he could win game one and still change the lineup, which is sacrilege in the traditional kind of NHL coaching textbook. So for all those reasons, I don't think it's that big a risk to throw Nick Robertson into the fray. It's a young guys league. Young guys are plenty exposed to pressure and hype as they kind of rise through the ranks. I know there's nothing quite like Toronto hype, but this kid does seem sure of himself, and he's also, I do think the one thing that's real about him and not a product of hype is the respect that the players have for him, like the veteran players in this team have for him and his work ethic. He's really done well for himself in the way he's been humble and respectful and asked questions and then just worked his butt off ever since he was drafted by this team. And I think that stuff holds a lot of water.
So one of the things you mentioned in your column yesterday, Dave, was essentially the Leafs typically start pretty hot in October, aside from maybe Frederik Andersen.
Yeah.
Now Sheldon Keefe's got the training camp that he probably always wanted at the beginning of the season. How do you think the Leafs are going to, do you think the pandemic actually is a blessing in disguise for the Toronto Maple Leafs? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, let's not say the pandemic. I mean,
sorry.
But I know what you're saying. Yeah, like the break. Let's say the break. The break. I know. No, you don't have to apologize. I know what you're saying, but I do think it is. I really do. And I think, look, when you look at some of the numbers that they've put up in October's, Austin Matthews has scored more goals than any player in the NHL since he came into the league in the month of October. I mean, he's Mr. 4 goals in his NHL debut in October. He's Mr. October. And they've been an incredible October team in terms of offense in most of the months, since they got Marner, Matthews, and Nylander together. And that was with Mike Babcock coaching them, right? Who really was disapproving of those kinds of offensive outbursts because he was talking about how they were unsustainable all the time. I mean, Sheldon Keefe was going to say no such thing. Sheldon Keefe's trying to get them to play a slightly more disciplined and more defensively responsible style, but he's not trying to eliminate the fireworks here. He wants this team to be an electric offensive machine. And so I think they're going to be empowered by a different coach. I think they're going to be empowered by the fact that skill and speed are going to be at a premium, especially in the early games. And I think it's going to go very well for them.
Any thoughts? The pause to me has created the situation where these young players are going into their 5th seasons because it's basically that kind of break, but they're really still only in their 4th season. So they've had kind of an off season to grow and to consider everything they've done and to decide where they're going to get better and really make that part of their mindset. So I think you'll actually end up seeing a better version of the Toronto Maple Leafs than the one we saw sort of struggling in their own zone in last season or earlier this season, however you want to phrase it.
Cool. So maybe just quickly, just to wrap up this chat, any early predictions? What teams are you guys liking so far in this return to play? Who do you think will be, this is really early. Yeah.
I think it would be a total shame if this happened, but the one team that scares me from the whole extra 8 that got added is the Chicago Blackhawks. I think they're poised to upset the Edmonton Oilers. It would be a very Oilers thing to do to have them lose in their own building and have everybody else carry on. But the Blackhawks kind of have everything, right? They have the DNA. They have that core of Taves and Kane and Keith that know how to win. It looks like their goalie's coming back. And they have exciting young players like DeBrincat and Kubalik that could maybe keep pace with the speedy Oilers. So if there's an upset in the making among the extra 8, it's the 24th best team among the 24 teams in my books. I'd watch out for the Chicago Blackhawks.
Yeah, I wonder about the Blackhawks. I mean, I think I've written them off in the past as just too old. Maybe this 4-month break rejuvenates a guy like Taves and a guy like Duncan Keith, who clearly are on the other side of their prime. There's no doubt about that, Kevin. But I do think you talk about pressure in a market for a sort of a potential unfulfilled. I mean, the Oilers are second only to the Maple Leafs in a team that really hasn't delivered on the promise of all the number 1 picks and all the hype and having 2 guys who are Hart Trophy worthy guys in McDavid and Draisaitl. So I agree with you. Like if you get in a 3-5 series against the Blackhawks, that's a scary thought. If you're McDavid and Draisaitl, if you find yourself in a hole in your home building, I could see that mounting pretty quickly and being quite detrimental. But if I'm picking anybody, I really think this lines up well for the Leafs. And I'm not a homer. I don't cheer for anybody. The wild card is Frederik Andersen. Obviously, that's the caveat to the October theory. Yeah, the idea that the Leafs have been really good in October, and this feels like it's going to be October hockey in August. But Frederik Andersen has not been particularly good in the opening months of any given season in his career. He did look pretty good in the exhibition game, whatever that means. I mean, I don't think it means much. But yeah, Frederick Anderson is obviously a huge, huge piece, as is every goaltender in this thing. I think it's an incredible, it's a lottery, essentially, the goaltending lottery. Who's going to get a hot one? Who's going to have a crappy one? And that will be the difference in a lot of these short series. So, man, I'll give you one piece of advice, guys. Do not bet more than you can afford to win, or more than you want to win on these games, because I think the greatest prognosticators on the planet are going to have a hard time having any clue what's going to happen in the days to come.
One thing you'll also see, I think, there's a bunch of teams that sort of have it in their DNA that they don't belong here, and they probably want to get out of here as quickly as possible. So if you see a team go down 0-2, I don't think they're going to win their home game in Game 3. I think they'll just pack it in. And I could kind of see the Montreal Canadiens group. There's a couple others, but you'll just see it. I think there'll be a lot of 3-game sweeps in this qualifying round.
We're definitely in uncharted territory. And I'm very pumped to see how it unravels. And I know you guys are too. So Dave, Kevin, thanks a lot for joining me today. And hopefully we can do one of these again in the near future. And stay safe out there.
That was great. Thanks a lot for having us.
Thanks, Justin.
See ya.